Welcome to the first episode of Flesh and Budget. Flesh and Budget is a way for me to help you play Flesh and Blood on a budget. I'll be covering Uzuri first, because my best friend Mick wants to play Uzuri. I thought, why not make a video how he can start off with a set of commons and build his way up to a competitively viable deck. It was really awesome making this video, so if you want to see other heroes, please do let me know. I will try and find a way for you to start off on a very low budget with your favorite hero and build it up to a competitively viable deck. If you like this content, please do consider to subscribe. That would be awesome. And let's jump into the deck. So Uzuri is an assassin in Flesh and Blood. She was released in Outsiders and has a very unique mechanic. Once per turn, attack reaction, banish a card from your hand face down, turn the card banished this way face up. If it's an attack action card with cost 2 or less, put the target attacking card with stealth from the active chain link on the bottom of its owner's deck, then put the banished card onto the active chain link as the attacking card. That's a lot of text, so let's break it down with the cards that you can use. So let's say we start off our turn. Very basic, and we play Isolate. Isolate is a stealth attack, so that's one of the conditions of the Uzuri swap. That's what we call that's what I call the attack reaction. It's a swap, and you're going to attack with Isolate. So Isolate is a 0 for 3. It has stealth and it has dominate. Dominate meaning that it cannot be blocked by more than one defending card from hand. You can technically defend with a defense reaction from Arsenal or some other cards, but let's leave that out of the equation for now. So I attack with Isolate, and you as an opponent will say, okay, I will block for 3. So you put a blocking card in front of Isolate. Okay, so far so good. That's just fair Flesh and Blood. At this instance, I will activate Uzuri, and I get to banish a card from hand. In this case, let's say Death Touch. And we will swap the attack from Isolate to Death Touch. Meaning that the Isolate, which is this one, will go on the bottom of the deck. And the Death Touch will be swapped in for the attack. So instead of attacking with the Isolate, we are now attacking with the Death Touch. And why this is strong is because this is after your opponent has blocked. So you decide to block with a card for 3, and I decided to Uzuri swap into 6. And now if you don't have a defense reaction, I will be hitting you for 3 damage with also the effect of Death Touch. That's why Uzuri has a very strong ability, and you utilize that ability quite a lot, and it creates a deck where it's pretty hard to defend against, especially if you're on a low life total. So talking about the Uzuri game plan, you can see a few different builds. This one is more of a red line, which typically means more of a aggro build. It's built around doing a lot of damage, not so much as defending, but most of the assassin cards block for 3, which makes it quite easy to defend as well. So the general game plan for Uzuri is to either attack with 1 or 2 daggers, the spider's bites, which we will be coming to, or a attack with go again. So let's say we're looking for a scrap, which can be a 5 go again, or a ravenous rebel, which can be a 4 go again, or hurl, which can be a 3 go again, and going ravenous rebel into, let's say, an Isolate, and then we swap in the Death Touch. This is a general game plan that you can play as an Uzuri. There's some spicy cards in the deck that we will be talking about in the deck part, well, at least the budget deck part, and I'll also be talking about how you can go from this $20 list up until a $950 list. Generally in Flesh and Blood, equipment serve a few different purposes. So a helmet is generally there to defend. Also looking at the more expensive legendary helmets, they're generally there to defend. A chest piece is for resources. Gloves are generally for more damage, and boots can extend your turn most of the time. They can also block, so boots are a little bit more flexible. So let's talk about the chest piece. One of the best replacements for one of the most expensive cards in Flesh and Blood. It's a Blossom of Spring. It's just one resource when you really need it. It does not block because it's just a common, but it is a nice way to generate that one resource when you really need it. You can also go for a Threadbare Tunic, which is in the Outsider set. Let me just... But there's one problem with Threadbare Tunic, and it is that you need to have no cards in hand. So Blossom of Spring is the ideal chest, but if you're buying Outsiders and you're just opening packs, you can make this deck with most of the common cards you get. You can also play the Threadbare Tunic. Also in Outsiders is Fisticuffs. It's a way to ensure the on-hit effect from either the swap target or another stealth card that you want to ensure hit. It is a card that we play in limited, and it's just a nice way to always threaten the 1 damage. Especially in the late game, Fisticuffs can be quite annoying because you have to play around the 1 extra. You will generally have a lot of blues, so you can go dagger, stealth attack, swap in, and still have 2 resources left over. If that's going too quickly, that's totally fine. But in the play patterns, near the end game, you will have a lot of blues, and this one can be quite tricky to defend, knowing it's still there. We have a basic helmet, Iron Rod Helm. It has blade break, so you can use it once. I would advise you to use it to block a breakpoint. So if I am going to attack you for 4 damage instead of 3 damage, you can block with 1 card and the helmet to ensure that an annoying on-hit effect doesn't hit you, basically. And the last one, very much a staple in Flesh and Blood, the Snapdragon Scalers. It's just a common, and it gives the next attack that costs 1 resource or less go again. It's a way to extend the turn, and you can do some cool stuff with it. So let's say we play the line that we discussed earlier, the Isolate into the Death Touch. Death Touch doesn't have go again, but let's say we still have 2 cards in hand. We can do the Isolate into the Death Touch, and then Snapdragons the Death Touch, giving it go again, and then we can still attack afterwards. That's generally what you use Snapdragons for. In the sideboard we also have some Arcane Barrier equipment, so an Arcane Lantern, which just has Arcane Barrier 1 to prevent some arcane damage, and also the No Rune Gloves, No Rune Hood. You don't need all of them if you have opponents that use arcane damage, so Rune Blades, Wizards in your local armories. I would advise you to pick up any one of these. Arcane Lantern probably being the most the least disruptive, because you still get the nice Blossom of Spring, Fisticuffs, Snapdragons. And if you want to go up to AB2, I would go for the Arcane Lantern, AB meaning Arcane Barrier, the Arcane Lantern and the No Rune Gloves. And if you're very scared or it's just a wizard, let's say it's Kano doesn't attack, so you can also go with the No Rune Hood. That way you still have the Snapdragons to extend the turn and the Blossom of Strix to generate 1 extra resource. And lastly, the weapons. They're token weapons, so you should get them in any pack. They're Spider Spites, it's what they're called, and they cost 2 to attack for 1, which doesn't seem that nice. But it has piercing, meaning that you cannot defend it with, let's say, the Iron Rod Helmet that we have. If you block with the Iron Rod Helmet, it will get +1, so it will still hit. And what makes Spider's Bite strong is the effect. So when this hits a hero, the next time they defend with 1 or more attack action cards this turn, those cards have -1. Meaning that if you go for a Spider's Bite, and let's say we pitch a blue for a Spider's Bite, Then we go into the same play that we've been talking about. We go into isolate. They can only defend with one card from hand at least. Let's say that we're playing against an Uzuri. They block with a blue infect. This one will only block for 2 now instead of 3, making it so that this one hits. But if we're going to swap in, let's say we swap in the Death Touch, it's going to hit for 4 instead of 3. You generally make a Blood Rot box, so it's 6 damage and 7 because the Spider's Bite hit. And Spider Bites also generate a very annoying late game state, wherein you can pitch. You will be having a lot of blues in the end. You can pitch 2 blues into 2 Spider Bites, and if they're on 1 or on 2 or on 3, it can be really annoying because at one point they will have to block the Spider's Bites, and that's the point where you're just going to take cards every single turn, and that makes Uzuri a very annoying deck to play against in the late game. Let's talk about the main deck. So Uzuri is a very interesting hero to build a deck around because you need 2 things generally to make it function. There's another deck floating around that's more built around contracts, but if you want to utilize the Uzuri ability, the attack reaction, the swap, you need to have stealth cards and you need to have payoff cards. So stealth cards are the cards like Isolate, Infect, Sedate, Wither. They have stealth on them and sometimes they have relevant on-hit effects as well. And you want payoff cards. So payoff cards are cards like Cut Down to Size, Humble, and in the first iteration of this deck, Death Touch, very important payoff card. Because you want to do let's say a blue infect, swap into a Cut Down to Size, which is the payoff. So you need to find a balance between stealth cards, payoff cards, and some other cards as well. Because if you're going to only attack once a turn for 6, let's say the Death Touch, I as an opponent will probably just block 6 on the stealth attack all the time and just come back with more damage. So what you need besides the stealth and the payoff cards are cards to make your turn go wider, which are cards like Hurl, looking for scrap, Ravenous Rebel, and also some cards to keep your opponent guessing. So Razor's Edge is in here for let's say we play an Infect and they block 3 and they expect the swap, and then you can just Razor's Edge, meaning that the Infect will hit and will do 3 damage if they only block for 3, and you get the Blood Rot, which does 2 damage, and the Razor's Edge, so that's 5 damage of nothing. So it's just a 0 cost red and a Razor's Edge. Razor's Edge also enables you to go for a isolate finish, for example. So you go isolate, which is dominated attack, and if you don't have a swap, you can just Razor's Edge once or even twice to push it up to 9, dealing 6 damage, which they cannot block anymore. So we have some surprise attacks and a way to make the attacks bigger. So Nimbalism is a way to make the stealth attacks bigger, so we can go Nimbalism into Isolate, or Nimbalism into looking for Scrap, or Hurl, or Violent Touch. So it's generally about just presenting really annoying cards to block and really annoying ways to block, which Spider's Bite also doesn't help with that. So let's jump into the card selection real quick, because we have a lot of decks to still go through. Cut Down to Size is a card if they don't respect the swap. So I play an Isolate for 1, you say no blocks. I swap in the Cut Down to Size. I will not only be doing 6 damage, I will also be taking a card from their hand. So really strong, really cheap payoff card. Also really nice and limited. Second one, Death Touch. Amazing card. It's a 1 for 6. So you can play it from the arsenal. Because it's 1, you can use Snapdragon Scalers. You can swap it in with the Uzuri ability. And it has a lot of flexibility. So you get all 3, the option to create one of 3 tokens. Frailty, Inertia, Blood Rot. And they all have different applications. So Frailty does -1 on weapons, meaning that the Kodachis from a ninja don't do any damage anymore, for example. The Inertia cycles the arsenal. So if you're going up against an Icelander who wants to keep a card in the arsenal most of the time, Inertia can be really strong. And of course Bloodroot Box, which does 2 damage, is just a nice way to push some damage through, which makes this a very flexible card, and why we include 6 of them in the first build. It's a rare, it's peanuts in cost, and it's just a really nice card that fits really well in the budget deck. Third one, I needed another payoff card. You can pick a few. I picked Humble. You can also pick another 6 attack card. That's inexpensive. Generally, you do want an on-hit effect, and this one has hero loses all abilities. And it can be relevant against certain heroes. And just see it also as a swap for 6 damage, and sometimes it's relevant. So against a Lexi, which is a ranger who wants to flip up a card in the arsenal, if she cannot do it, you can kind of lock her into the arsenal slot, taking a turn, or just hampering her output by a lot. So Humble has some nice applications into certain heroes that rely on their hero ability. We have Hurl, which is a 0 for 3 go again. I generally would ignore this text, so throwing a dagger is generally not worth it. Just play it as a 0 for 3. We have the first of stealth cards, Infect. We have reds and we have blues. Blues are just there to pay for other things. You can also block with them because they have a block value of 3. And the red ones are really nice to also target with the Razor's Edge, for example, which we talked about. Isolate is the bread and butter. You will be playing those even in the most expensive version of Uzuri. It's just the perfect card. And looking for scrap, a nice way of going wide, attacking for 5 go again, and the banish. So you have to banish a card with 1 from your graveyard. We actually run quite a few ones, so all the blue stealth attacks have 1 attack. So if you block with 1 of them, you can use looking for scrap, and you can go something like looking for scrap, which does 5, into a dagger, or you go dagger and then looking for scrap, and then you can go into an isolate and swap a death touch in, for example, which is a pretty good turn. And that's off 3 cards, is why Uzuri is quite strong. We have Nimbalism to push to make the first attack, so the go again attack, bigger. We have Ravenous Rebel. It's a 0 as go again. You have to flip up the top card in your deck. It can mean that you will be flipping up a blue, attacking for 2. That does suck, but it's one of the few very good 0 go again cards, because it can be 0 for 4. And a really nice trick to know about is if you have a Ravenous Rebel in your hand, you can attack with a stealth card. So we attack with the Infect, and then we swap in the Ravenous Rebel. Swapping in the Ravenous Rebel does a few things. One, it will be attacking, so it does not attack, meaning that it doesn't reveal a card, and it will do 5 damage instead of 2, 3, or 4. And it has go again. So although the stealth card doesn't have go again, not generating back the action point, basically ending your turn, if you swap in the Ravenous Rebel, you will have go again. So you can go stealth into swap Ravenous Rebel into, let's say, a death touch from the arsenal, which can be a nice trick you can pull on an opponent. Razor's Edge is there to also have threat with the Infects, and maybe even the Isolates. We have Sink Below. It's a really nice defense reaction, making you be able to block out 4 instead of 3. 4 is generally a break point, and it helps you cycle your hand. So if you don't have a payoff card and you have 2 stealth cards, you can block with the Sink Below, with 1 card on the bottom, maybe a blue stealth card and draw the top card, and maybe it's the payoff card you needed to make your turn function. We have Virulent Touch. It's a really annoying card to block. It has some value as a swap as well, and it's great from the arsenal. So if you're it costs 0, and if your opponent has defended with a card, it will create a Bloodrot box token. This means that if you're going to play this one, let's say we attack for 4 and the opponent is at 3, they have to block it, of course, because otherwise they will be dead. But even if they block with 1 card, so let's say they block for 3, they will take the 1 damage and still have the Bloodrot box token as well. So either they block with 2 cards and take 2 damage from the Bloodrot, for example, or they take the 1 and they pay the Bloodrot box token. But it can be really annoying, and you can also swap it in. So if I attack with a stealth card and someone blocks with 2 cards, blocking 6, we can swap in the Virulent Touch and still present damage. Although we won't be pushing any physical damage at that point, we will generate the Bloodrot box token under their control. Threat, a staple for assassins, giving minus on defending cards, ensuring that your strong cards hit. So generally, I think you want the Death Touch to hit, which is the most important target for now. And we run blues and yellows because yellow -3. The red ones don't pay for anything. So if you're wondering why not the red, you can play them, but you don't want a lot of shreds into your hand. Generally, cards will be blocking for 3 and not for 4. So the times you need a red shred will not be a lot of the time. And then we still have two stealth cards that round out the deck. Sedate, creating an inertia token, and Wither, creating a frailty token. Let's jump into some other cards that you can include. I wouldn't really call it a sideboard. It's just your preference and the cards you have available to you. So if you want to go a bit more defensive, you can include cards like Fate Foreseen, which is another staple defense reaction in Flesh and Blood, which is nice just to have. Frailty Trap, which can be really nice against decks that go wide, creating the frailty token, but it does only block for 3 instead of 4. And the Oasis Respite, which can be really nice against anything that does arcane damage. And it also is a nice way to have more, be more of a defensive style deck. So you can run 3 of all of these, add them into the deck, and try and win the game over a very long period of time. It will be a struggle because you don't have very much of the disruption that you need, which is just in the more expensive cards. Another card you can play if you're playing against a lot of other heroes that create tokens. You can play the Infectious Host, which copies the tokens you got. At least the Frailty, Inertia, Bloodrot box. It's just an option. It's a 0 for 4. You can play it from the arsenal. You can play it from hand. It's okay. We have contracts, which I won't be jumping into contracts a whole lot, but this is a 0 for 4 with 3 block, meaning that it's nice. It does come from Dynasty, so you need to open another booster, or you need to get these cards from someone that has opened Dynasty, or you buy them online. But it can be a nice card, and it is used even in the more expensive versions because it has some value. And the last card that you can include, which is pretty nice, it's a attack reaction. It creates a Bloodrot box on hit, and it gives +3 in the attack. It does cost 1. Razor's Edge costs 0. This costs 1. So you will be using a card to pay for this as well. If you're going to just attack with a stealth card, you won't be paying a card. Using this one, you have to pay 1. But it does give a lot of value. So the +3 is nice, but also the Bloodrot box on hit. And if you play this on a Infect, it will do 6, and it will do Bloodrot box twice. So meaning it's a 10 damage swing, which can be really nice. And it also keeps your opponent guessing. So if you're swapping half the time and then you play something like a spike with blood rot, it can be annoying for an opponent to see the play pattern you're going to do. So if you're let's say I attack with a blue infect, and you decide not to block, okay, because you think, he'll just Razor's Edge, and then I swap in the cut down to size, and then I attack with a red isolate. You think, oh, that's going to be scary, or we don't have a payoff. We can play the spike with blood rot, meaning that it's always going to do 5 damage, 3 from the buff and 2 from the blood rot, and if they didn't block it, that's 8. So it can be a very annoying deck to play against if you also add cards like spike with blood rot. This is the one that I would include. You also have spike with frailty and spike with inertia, which don't do as much as the spike with blood rots. But if you like this flexible kind of game style where you have to keep your opponent guessing, you can add some more spikes if you like. So now that you've seen all the cards in the budget deck, I wanted to just show you some gameplay patterns you can expect playing the deck. The upgrades will be in another video. I will tag it right here or here. I'm not entirely sure, but there will be a link to the upgrade video. And I just wanted to help you out understanding the flow of Uzuri. So let's just start this game. It's a practice dummy. Makes it a lot easier to show things. No setup whatsoever. So in our first hand we see pretty much everything we want to see, because, well, without going into the specifics of keeping an arsenal and trying to set up turns, etc., we have a pretty nice big turn into our opponent. So we can go Nimblism, buffing the first attack, into a hurl. We don't pay for the hurl. We attack for 6, which is perfectly fine. And we still have go again. So we have a few choices. We can go for a dagger. We can go for a cut down to size. We can go for a just a regular old infect. In this case, I would probably, if you're looking at this hand, it's not that viable to put the cut down to size in arsenal, because you want the stealth cards, not the swap cards. You have to swap from hand, not from the arsenal. So that's not a viable target to arsenal. We can do 2 spider's bites, just cycling away these 2 cards. We can also arsenal the infect, setting up a swap turn, which probably with this hand is the best. We already pushed 6. And one other thing to consider is if they didn't block, which they probably would have if it's turn 0, you can actually play the infect and the cut down to size, because the effect does have relevance then. So let's just play the super safe pass, arsenal the infect, and we go to the next turn. So with this hand, we see a few things. We see that we have a Death Touch, which is a premium way to premium card to swap in. We have the Isolate, which is a perfect stealth card, and we have 2 cards left over. So the Infect is perfect, threatening just a 5 of a 0. But depending on the hand of our opponent, we can go 2 ways. We can either block with the cut down to size and the Infect, allowing us to play the Infect, swapping in the Death Touch and arsenaling the Isolate, or we could technically block with these 3 cards and just play out the Infect, keeping the other Infect there for a better swappable target. So because we're playing against an AI, or just a practice dummy, we can just mimic like we blocked, like this, because you probably will have blocked for 5, or even something like this, or even something like this, depending on what you're up against. So let's just pretend our opponent attacks for 2, and then we block something else for 3. We block 5 in total, allowing us to keep these 3 cards. and pushing back hopefully more. This is also why we add a lot of go again, because with this hand we could have gone for a dagger or 2 daggers and they swap, which isn't that good. And this way we can convert the cards to blocking value and still come back with a nice attack. So we just block off the tusk, and in our own turn we will attack with the infect. They won't block. We swap in the dead touch, which gets arsenaled. They get to react. They don't, and we hit. And for sake of science, just choose the blood rot. We arsenal the isolate, and this is generally the turn cycle you want to see. We have the isolate, we swap in the humble, we can put in the violent touch, or we can put in the razor's edge. So with a hand like this, we're still lacking the go again. We do have the razor's edge, but not a good target for the razor's edge. What we can do are a few things. We can just double block in total for 6, which is a perfectly fine turn. Let's just say we do something like this. We block 6, allowing us to play out the isolate, swap in the humble, and arsenal the violent touch. So we attack with the isolate, swap in the humble. You could also swap in the violent touch, but it's much better in the arsenal. And then we arsenal the violent touch. And now we have a really good turn. So we take the damage, whatever the opponent throws at us, because we can go for we have a 1. So we go for a hurl, 0. Then we can go for looking for scrap, banishing the wither for 5. We can go for spider's bite as well. And if they don't block, we do the nimblism into a violent touch. So why did I sequence it like this? I'll just refer to the start of the turn. Generally, just a little bit of basics. You want to start off with the smaller attacks on the chain, which probably will hit. So we play hurl because it will probably hit. Hurl being at 3, go again. Then you want to find a way to hopefully go over, and that way with the looking for a scrap we can do 5, which will be annoying to block as well. And they might block 2 cards. They might have blocked the hurl. They probably wouldn't have blocked the hurl, to be honest, but they could have blocked the hurl. And if they did block the hurl and they do block the looking for scrap, we're certain our next attack will hit. Oh, accidentally pitched the wrong card. So looking for scrap is 5. The hurl was 3. They probably they shouldn't have blocked the hurl. They might have, but if they did, they have 3 cards left in hand, so they might block 2 of the looking for scrap as well, meaning that they only have 1 blocking card left. Dagger, which probably will be free, and then we can go into the nimblism, into the violent touch. So we presented 3 plus 1 is 4, plus 5 is 9, plus 7 is 16 damage with the blood rot if they block. And in this case they don't block. And because we played out every card we had, we now need to find a way to set up again, maybe slow them down, or we can look to keep the tempo. After a big push, we still want to create some tempo. They probably didn't attack. Maybe they arsenal their card and drew back up to 4. So what we're going to do is we're going to attack with a dagger, which we can because we have 2 blues. Then we can go for sedate, swapping in the dead touch, allowing us to even go for fisticuffs. In this situation, there's no need. We attack. Maybe we force them to pay a blue if they're on low life total, and we arsenal the violent touch. Now we do have draw into a hand that's suboptimal because we want to swap in the dead touch. We don't want to play out the dead touch, which we can't because it's coming from the hand and not from the arsenal. So we see the tusk. And this is why sink below's here. We can actually go for a sink. We sink the shred, hoping to find a stealth card. You might think it's scripted, but it's not. And then we can go hurl. It's an annoying card to block. Into infect. We swap in the dead touch. And we have to wait for the dead touch to arrive on the chain. And then we snapdragon it. And if they don't block everything, we give them a blood rot, and we can even go for a violent touch. And we reset the turn cycle again, draw into 2 shreds, which isn't perfect, which is it's not that great. So what we can do is we can just block everything out this turn. And this is a real way to play Uzuri. You just block and wait for the perfect cards. We could technically keep one to fuel a spider's bite, for example. But it's perfectly fine to block 8. They still have the blood rot box in this case. We either play out the Ravenous Rebel, which doesn't feel so good, or we go put it in the arsenal, setting up a bigger turn. And as you can see, we find an okay-ish turn. We have the Tusk again, so we probably won't be playing out the cut down to size, so maybe we block with the cut down to size, trying to keep the Ravenous Rebel and Nimblisms. The Ravenous Rebels and Nimblism. We can just block 2, go Ravenous, the red, perfect. Ravenous. We Ravenous into Nimblism, Ravenous, and we arsenal the dead touch. But this is generally the play pattern. You want to keep one hand, put it into the arsenal. Generally you want to put in either a stealth card, a go again card, or something like a dead touch, which can be played off a Blossom of Spring. So let's say they have a really big turn and we are forced to block. This hand doesn't block that well. That's the downside of this deck. Because if you're going to upgrade, you're going to get more 3 blocks. But let's say we block with everything. We can still Blossom of Spring, play a dead touch from arsenal, which is just very efficient. We give them a blood rot, and they attack again. We have pretty much everything you want to see. You can go for the infect with a shred. So maybe we block the Tusk. And we try and keep the Wither for the arsenal to allow us to play a 1-card hand, basically. Do the infect. They might block. So we play the shred. Wait. They don't block. Which is kind of annoying, so I cannot show you, but let's just cycle away the shred for this particular instance. And we get the Wither. And we have the stealth card, we have the humble. So now we can take the damage, maybe, if we're going for a kill, for example. And we can go Spider's Bite. Spider's Bite. And then we go for a Wither, maybe, depending on the game state, of course. And then we swap in the humble again. Which deck doesn't matter in this instance. So as you can see, that's the game. That's the flow of the game you're gonna create. Okay, so let's say in this instance we don't have a payoff card. We do have the red isolate. So what we can do is sink. Not the best card. And the blue helps us fuel a dagger, and they're looking for a scrap. So we don't want to cycle the blue. And we already have a stealth card, so we put stealth card on the bottom. And sadly, we don't find a payoff. Which is fine, because now we can go into a late game cycle for Uzuri, because you will be running blues, and as you can see we're at 23, so there aren't a lot of payoff cards left. You can see we have played 2 dead touches, 3 dead touches yellow, 2 dead touches red. I see 3 cut down to sizes, so it will be pretty hard to still find the payoff cards. So looking for scrap is actually a pretty important card. And now we can actually go for a Spider's Bite into Spider's Bite into looking for a scrap. which we don't have a 1. No, we don't. Okay, so it's just for 4. It isn't perfect, but it's okay. And we keep the isolate for if we find a razor's edge. There it is. We actually have we have a few options to play: dead touch or the razor's edge. Probably the dead touch first. So we block and we go isolate, swap, dead touch. And let's just say we pick this one. And now we have a choice. Both block for 3. This one pitches for yellow, this one pitches for red. I don't think it really matters, but I would rather see a... Well, generally you rather see a stealth card in the arsenal, because you can find a payoff, but we don't run a lot of payoffs anymore, so let's just keep the razor's edge, because if we draw into another isolate red, let's see if we still have a red isolate. That's 1. I count 1, so the odds of finding a red isolate is pretty big. So we can go for the razor's edge, and we do find the red isolate. So maybe we go block 3. Now we have a pretty good finishing turn, so we go for the Ravenous Rebel into the isolate, razor's edge, and we can even shred their defenses. And at this point the game will probably have been over far before this state of the game, but it's just an example of the play patterns you can expect when playing this budget deck. I hope this helps you out in your first games. And if you have any questions about the play patterns, just let me know, ask your questions in the comments, and I'll help you out. I hope this deck helps you start off with your journey into Flesh and Blood or into competitive Flesh and Blood. I think Uzuri is a great hero to do so. You have to learn how to set up big turns. You have to learn how to block, when not to block. It can be quite a challenge because you play very much a fair deck, not being able to push 20 or 30 damage like you can with, for example, Fi. It does teach you the fundamentals you need to get better at Flesh and Blood. And if you start upgrading the deck, you will feel a lot better. So the upgrade guides, do check them out, especially the first upgrade to 100 euros or $100 does help out a lot, increases your game plan, makes it a lot more annoying to play against the deck. So check out the upgrade guide, and I'll see you in the next video. Does my audio work? Let's see if it works. Yeah.